Looking back, I should have seen the signs. They were there, scattered like breadcrumbs across the pristine surface of my seemingly perfect life. But when you've spent 30 years building a reality you believe in, your mind becomes masterful at disguising uncomfortable truths. I was David Mitchell, respected investment manager at Preston & Associates, husband to Catherine for 25 years, father to our college-aged daughter Emma. My corner office overlooked downtown Chicago, and our Victorian home in Lake Forest stood as a testament to decades of careful planning and hard work. The first crack appeared during our anniversary dinner at Le Petit Bistro. Catherine was distracted, her manicured fingers dancing nervously around her wine glass. Her phone, usually forgotten in her purse during our dates, kept drawing her attention like a magnetic force. Each notification brought a slight flush to her cheeks, a detail I initially dismissed but would later replay in my mind countless times. "Everything all right?" I asked, trying to catch her eyes across the flickering candlelight. "Of course," she replied, too quickly. "Just some last-minute details for the charity gala next week. You know how Helen gets when things aren't perfect." I nodded, accepting the explanation because that's what trust means in a marriage. Helen Parker, her best friend of 15 years and fellow board member at the Children's Hospital Foundation, was indeed known for her perfectionism. Yet something in Catherine's voice struck a discordant note, like a piano key slightly out of tune. The second warning came through Tom Reynolds, my closest friend since college and senior partner at the firm. We were sharing our usual Thursday lunch at Morton's when he hesitated over his scotch, uncharacteristically serious. "David," he started, then paused, weighing his words. "Have you noticed anything different about Catherine lately?" My fork stopped midway to my mouth. "Different how?" "Probably nothing," he backtracked, but his eyes held something that made my stomach tighten. "Just. Emma mentioned seeing her at Starbucks last week with someone. A man. Probably business-related." The seed of doubt, once planted, grew like a thorny vine around my thoughts. I found myself noting details I'd previously overlooked: Catherine's new gym membership at a club across town, despite our home state-of-the-art fitness room. Her sudden interest in tennis lessons, though she'd always claimed to hate the sport. The mysterious texts that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. I tried to rationalize it all. 25 years of marriage earned the benefit of doubt. Catherine had supported me through the early years of building my career, raised our daughter with dedication and grace, and maintained her own identity through charitable work. We were solid. Weren't we? But doubt is a patient predator. It lurks in the shadows of your mind, feeding on every unexplained absence, every hushed phone conversation, every slight change in routine. I began noticing how Catherine's social calendar had evolved over the past few months. Board meetings that ran mysteriously late. Weekend charity events I wasn't invited to attend. Even her scent had changed, a new perfume I didn't recognize replaced her signature Chanel. The third sign came from an unexpected source. Marcus John, our firm's brilliant but socially awkward IT specialist, caught me after a late meeting. His usual confidence was replaced by nervous energy as he fidgeted with his tablet. "Mr. Mitchell," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure if I should, but given how much you've helped me with my career." He swallowed hard. "I was updating the security protocols for the building's parking garage, reviewing camera footage, and I saw something that might concern you." My heart rate quickened, but my voice remained steady. "What kind of something, Marcus?" He hesitated, then quickly pulled up a video file. "This was last Friday, around 7 p.m. I know Mrs. Mitchell's car from the charity events." The footage showed Catherine's silver Mercedes pulling into the visitors section of our building's garage. But it wasn't Friday's board meeting that caught my attention, it was the man who emerged from the passenger seat. Even in the grainy security footage, I recognized Richard Warner, the new hospital board member Catherine had mentioned hiring last month. They lingered by the car, speaking closely. Too closely. The video ended, but the image burned itself into my mind. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me. There's more footage from other days, but I thought you should know. I thanked him calmly, maintaining the composed facade that had served me well through countless negotiations. But inside, something fundamental was shifting. The carefully constructed pillars of my life were beginning to tremble, and the architect in me knew that when foundations shake, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. That night, I sat in my home office until dawn, watching the city lights flicker through the window while my laptop illuminated a growing list of inconsistencies in our shared life. Credit card statements showing restaurant charges in areas of the city Catherine rarely visited. Phone records with recurring numbers I didn't recognize. A pattern was emerging, and each piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of my trust. As I closed my laptop, the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. Catherine was still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming peacefully in our bed of 25 years. I made a decision then, one that would set in motion events I couldn't possibly predict. I would not confront her, not yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was facing. And if my suspicions proved correct, I would need a strategy that went beyond mere confrontation. I had built my career on understanding risk and reward, on calculating the precise moments to act or wait. Now, those same skills would serve a different purpose. The game was changing, and I intended to learn all the rules before making my first move. Little did I know, I wasn't the only one playing a long game. And some of the pieces on this chessboard were not what they appeared to be at all. The weight of knowledge is a curious burden. It settles not just in your mind, but in your bones, altering the very way you move through the world. Each morning, I watched Catherine prepare for her day with the practiced grace of a woman who'd performed the same routine for decades. Only now, every gesture seemed laden with hidden meaning, her careful selection of clothing, the extra moments spent perfecting her makeup, the way she checked her phone before even kissing me goodbye. I began my own performance, crafting a mask of normalcy that felt like lead against my skin. "Have a good day, honey," I'd say, watching her walk to her car, wondering how many other lies we'd both tell before sunset. The irony wasn't lost on me, in trying to uncover her deception, I'd become an actor in my own right. The breakthrough came through Helen Parker, though not in the way she intended. Catherine's supposed best friend arrived at my office unannounced, her designer handbag clutched like a shield against her chest. Her face wore the concerned expression of someone about to perform what they believed was a moral duty. "David," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I've been struggling with whether to tell you this." She paused, perfectly manicured fingers fidgeting with her pearl necklace. "It's about Catherine and certain decisions she's been making." I kept my face neutral, years of negotiating high-stakes deals serving me well. "Go on." "The hospital board meetings, they're not what you think. Richard Warner has been pushing for a complete restructuring of the foundation's investment portfolio. He's convinced several board members to move their personal investments to his management as well." Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Including Catherine." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about emotional infidelity, there was money involved, serious money. I thought of the recent changes in our joint accounts, the subtle withdrawals Catherine had explained away as renovation plans for the lake house. "How much?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Helen's eyes widened slightly. "You didn't know?" "Catherine moved nearly $2 million to Warner's private fund last month. She said you had agreed." I thanked Helen for her concern, maintaining my composure until she left. Then I called Marcus Zhang. "I need everything you can find on Richard Warner's financial history." "Everything." Marcus didn't disappoint. Within hours, my secure email contained a disturbing pattern of investment schemes spanning 3 states. Warner would charm his way onto charitable boards, seduce wealthy donors, particularly women, with promises of exclusive investment opportunities, then vanish with the money. He'd never been convicted, always staying just within the bounds of legality through carefully worded contracts and plausible deniability. But Catherine was smart, brilliant, even. How had she fallen for this? Unless. The second revelation came that evening, during the charity gala I'd originally planned to skip. I watched from across the ballroom as Catherine and Warner worked the crowd together, their body language speaking volumes. This wasn't just a con man and his mark. They moved with the synchronized grace of partners, of conspirators. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mr. Mitchell, you need to see this now." The attached documents showed a complex web of shell companies, all leading back to a holding corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Among the listed directors was a name that stopped my heart, Catherine Mitchell. The registration date was 3 years ago. 3 years. While I'd been building our life, she'd been constructing an escape route. I excused myself from the gala, needing space to think. In the parking garage, I heard voices echoing off the concrete walls, Catherine and Warner, thinking themselves alone. "Everything's proceeding according to plan," Warner was saying. "David doesn't suspect a thing. Once the foundation's investments are secured." Catherine's laugh cut through me like a blade. "David's always been predictable. That's what made this so easy. He sees what he wants to see. And Emma? She'll understand eventually. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better." My own daughter. They'd discussed my own daughter. I stood in the shadows, letting their words wash over me, each one crystallizing my resolve. The David Mitchell they knew, predictable, trusting, easily manipulated, died in that garage. In his place rose something else, something forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by rage. But rage alone is useless. I needed precision. Strategy. The skills I'd spent decades honing could now serve a different purpose. Catherine and Warner had built their plan on the assumption of my blindness. They never considered what would happen if I truly opened my eyes. Back in my office, I began making calls. Tom Reynolds answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "How long have you known?" I asked without preamble. His silence spoke volumes. "I tried to warn you, David. But there's something else you need to know about Warner. Something that changes everything." As Tom spoke, I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Sometimes the universe has a peculiar sense of justice. Because Richard Warner, the consummate con man, had made one crucial mistake. He'd chosen the wrong mark, at the wrong firm, at exactly the wrong time. And I was about to show them both exactly how unpredictable I could be. The game was no longer about saving my marriage. It was about justice. Revenge. And unlike Catherine and Warner, I wouldn't need to break the law to destroy them. I just needed to be smarter, more patient, and willing to sacrifice everything I thought I knew about love and trust. As I drove home that night, Catherine's words echoed in my mind, "Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better." She had no idea how right she was. Or who would be holding the match. There's a peculiar clarity that comes with complete betrayal. It strips away the comfortable illusions we build around ourselves, leaving behind a crystalline understanding of human nature in all its raw, devastating truth. As I sat in my office the next morning, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across Chicago's skyline, I felt this new awareness settle into my bones like frost. Tom's revelation about Warner had changed everything. The man wasn't just a sophisticated con artist, he was a former employee of Preston and Associates, fired 15 years ago for attempting to manipulate client accounts. A fact buried so deeply in non-disclosure agreements and legal settlements that even I, a senior partner, hadn't known. Until now. "He's been planning this for years, David," Tom had explained, his voice heavy with regret. "Using Catherine to get revenge on the firm. She's not just his accomplice, she's his masterpiece." The words had cut through me like shattered glass, each fragment reflecting a different angle of my wife's betrayal. Catherine hadn't simply fallen for a con, she'd chosen to become one. Every smile, every touch, every moment of intimacy over the past 3 years had been carefully choreographed steps in an elaborate dance of deception. I opened my laptop, reviewing the dossier Marcus had compiled. Warner's pattern was elegant in its simplicity: target wealthy families through charitable organizations, use romantic entanglements to gain trust, then orchestrate complex financial schemes that left his victims too embarrassed to pursue legal action. But this time was different. This wasn't just about money, it was personal. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine: "Missing you. Dinner tonight?" I felt my lips curve into a smile that held no warmth. The art of deception was a game two could play, and I'd learned from the best. "Of course," I replied. "Le Petit Bistrot. For old time's sake." The restaurant held echoes of our anniversary dinner, now tainted by understanding. Catherine arrived wearing the emerald dress I'd given her for Christmas, her smile radiant with practiced affection. I watched her perform the role of loving wife with masterful precision, noting each carefully calculated gesture, each perfectly timed laugh. "You seem distracted," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her fingers were cool against my skin, like marble carved into the shape of intimacy. "Just thinking about legacy," I replied, letting vulnerability seep into my voice. "About what we'll leave behind." Her eyes flickered with interest, the predator sensing opportunity. "What do you mean?" "I've been considering making some changes. Investment-wise." I paused, watching her suppress her eagerness. "Tom mentioned that Richard Warner has been doing remarkable things with the Hospital Foundation's portfolio." The trap was set with delicate precision. Catherine's response would tell me everything. "Really?" Her surprise was perfectly calibrated. "I hadn't realized you and Richard had discussed business." "We haven't. Not yet." I took a slow sip of wine. "But I've been thinking about moving some of our personal investments. Something more aggressive, perhaps. Times are changing." The look that crossed her face was complex, triumph warring with calculation. She thought she was watching her plan unfold perfectly. She didn't realize she was watching it unravel. Later that night, I met Tom in a private room at the Chicago Club. The wood-paneled walls and leather chairs felt like a war room, appropriate for what we were about to undertake. "Marcus found something else," Tom said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Warner's been moving money through a series of offshore accounts. But here's the thing, the patterns don't match his usual MO. These transfers, they're too sophisticated." I studied the data, feeling the pieces click into place. "Because they're not his work. They're Catherine's." Tom's expression shifted. "David, there's more. Helen Parker's been lying to you. She's not just Catherine's friend, she's integral to their operation. The charity gala next week? It's not a fundraiser. It's their endgame." The revelation should have shocked me. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been assembling in my subconscious. Helen's convenient warning, her perfectly timed concern, all calculated moves in a grand manipulation. I leaned back, letting the weight of truth settle around me like a familiar coat. "Tell me about Emma. How much does our daughter know?" Tom's hesitation was answer enough. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was another piece on their chessboard. The thought crystallized something inside me, transforming grief into cold, calculated purpose. "Here's what we're going to do," I began, pulling out my own tablet. "Warner and Catherine think they're orchestrating a symphony of deception. They don't realize they're actually performing a requiem." As I outlined my plan, I saw understanding dawn in Tom's eyes. It was elegant, brutal, and completely legal, a devastating combination of financial strategy and psychological warfare that would turn their own methods against them. "David," Tom interrupted, concern etching his features. "This will destroy everything. Not just them, but parts of your life you might want to salvage." I thought of Catherine's emerald dress, of Emma's childhood photos on my desk, of 2 decades of memories now tainted by deceit. Some things, I replied, need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt. My phone buzzed, another text from Catherine, "Thank you for dinner. Sweet dreams, darling." I stared at the words, marveling at how familiar letters could be arranged into such exquisite lies. The game was entering its final phase, and I was about to teach them all the true meaning of legacy. After all, revenge, like investment, is all about playing the long game. And I had finally learned to stop following my heart and start following the money. Little did they know, their carefully constructed house of cards was about to meet a force they never calculated, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. The human heart, I've discovered, doesn't break all at once. It fractures incrementally, each crack spreading like ice across a frozen lake until the entire surface is a web of silvered pain. As I sat in Emma's childhood bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of innocence, debate team trophies, family photos, the worn teddy bear she'd never let us discard, I felt another fissure form in what remained of my paternal certainties. The evidence on my tablet cast a cold blue glow across the pink walls. Email exchanges between Emma and Warner dating back 18 months. Financial transfers to an account in her name at Warner's private bank. My daughter wasn't just aware of their scheme, she was instrumental to it. "Dad?" Her voice from the doorway startled me. Emma stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light, still wearing her business attire from her internship at the foundation. In that moment, I saw both versions of her, my little girl in soccer cleats and the sophisticated conspirator she'd become. "How long have you known?" My voice emerged as a whisper, though the question roared through my consciousness like a tempest. The subtle shift in her posture, a squaring of shoulders, a lifting of chin, told me everything before she spoke. "Mom showed me the truth 2 years ago. About the firm, about what they did to Richard." "What they did?" The words tasted like ash. The way the partners destroyed his career, buried him in legal fees and blacklists. All because he tried to expose their creative accounting practices. Her voice hardened with righteousness that cut me to the bone. "He was trying to protect the clients, Dad. Like you always taught me to do." The irony of her words struck me with physical force. I had indeed taught her to stand up for what she believed in, to fight for justice. Now those very principles had been twisted into weapons against me. "And the money? The offshore accounts in your name?" A flicker of something, doubt, fear, crossed her face before being replaced by determined conviction. "Insurance. For after everything comes out at the gala. Mom said we'd need protection from the fallout." I stood slowly, my reflection in her vanity mirror catching my eye. When had I aged so dramatically? The silver at my temples had spread like frost, and lines I didn't recognize mapped new territories of grief across my face. "Emma," I said carefully, "have you verified any of Warner's claims? About the firm, about me?" "I trust Mom," she replied, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice. "And Richard has proof. He showed us documents." "Documents can lie," I interrupted softly. "Just like people we love can lie. Even to protect us. Especially to protect us." Something in my tone must have reached her because she took a step forward, uncertainty finally cracking through her composed facade. "What do you mean?" I pulled up Marcus's files on my tablet, the real history of Richard Warner. Not the sanitized version he'd fed my wife and daughter, but the brutal truth of lives ruined across 3 states. Families torn apart, retirement funds evaporated, dreams crushed under the weight of his sophisticated deceptions. "Before you choose sides in this war," I said, holding out the tablet, "make sure you know who's really wearing the white hat." Emma's hands trembled as she took the device, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the evidence. Each swipe of her finger seemed to age her, stripping away layers of carefully constructed certainty. "This can't be." She started, but her voice trailed off as she reached the photos. Warner with other families, other daughters, other lives he'd methodically destroyed. The gala, I said quietly, isn't about justice, Emma. It's about revenge. But not the kind you think. She looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my daughter instead of Catherine's protégé. Dad, what are we going to do? The plural pronoun hit me like a physical blow. We. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight. That depends, I replied, measuring each word carefully, on whether you're ready to learn what real justice looks like. As I outlined the truth, the full truth, I watched the last vestiges of her innocence crumble. It was like watching a second betrayal, this time with me as the destroyer of illusions. But some demolitions are necessary for rebuilding on stronger foundations. Later that night, as I sat in my study reviewing the final preparations for the gala, my phone lit up with a text from Catherine. Emma seemed disturbed at dinner. Everything okay? I stared at the message, appreciating the layers of manipulation embedded in those simple words. Catherine was probing, testing, trying to gauge if her carefully constructed dominoes were still lined up perfectly. Just father-daughter talks, I replied, adding a carefully chosen emoticon to maintain the facade. You know how emotional she gets about her future. The future. Such an elegant weapon of a word. Because what Catherine didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Emma had spent the afternoon making copies of every document, every email, every transaction she'd been party to. The daughter she thought she'd recruited had just become my secret weapon. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. I'd wanted revenge, yes, but I'd never wanted to destroy my daughter's faith in family along with it. Some collateral damage, it seems, is unavoidable in wars of the heart. Tomorrow would bring the gala, and with it, the first phase of my counterattack. Warner and Catherine had no idea that their perfect plan had already begun to unravel, thread by careful thread, pull by strategic pull. Yet as I traced my finger along the frame of an old family photo, I couldn't help but wonder, in this game of mutual destruction, would there be anything left worth saving when the dust finally settled? The answer, I feared, would cost far more than any of us had bargained for. The night of the gala arrived draped in winter's early darkness, the Drake Hotel's golden lights piercing the December gloom like shards of artificial sun. I adjusted my bow tie in the mirror, studying the stranger who wore my face. The past week's revelations had carved new hollows beneath my cheekbones, deepened the lines around my mouth. But it was my eyes that gave me pause, they held the cold clarity of someone who had walked through fire and emerged not purified, but tempered. Catherine appeared behind me, resplendent in midnight blue silk that whispered against the marble floor. For a moment, watching her reflection, I felt the ghost of what we'd once been, two young dreamers building a life from nothing but ambition and trust. The pain of that memory was exquisite, like pressing on a bruise to remember its cause. You're unusually quiet tonight, she observed, her hands sliding across my shoulders in a gesture that once meant comfort but now felt like the prelude to a strike. Just thinking about legacy, I replied, echoing our dinner conversation. About how quickly everything we build can change. A subtle tension flickered across her features, there and gone like heat lightning. Change isn't always a bad thing, darling. If she only knew how right she was. The ballroom was a masterpiece of calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across familiar faces, the city's elite, our social circle of 2 decades, all unwitting players in tonight's performance. Helen Parker held court near the champagne fountain, her laugh carrying above the string quartet. Warner worked the room with practiced charm, every handshake potentially worth millions. Emma appeared at my elbow, stunning in emerald green that reminded me painfully of her childhood eyes. Everything's in place, she whispered. Tom's team is standing by. I nodded, letting my gaze drift to the ornate clock above the ballroom doors. In precisely 17 minutes, while Warner gave his keynote speech about the Foundation's bold new direction, Marcus would activate the first domino in our careful sequence of destruction. Catherine approached with 2 champagne flutes, her smile radiant with anticipated triumph. "Richard's about to begin. Shall we find our seats?" The head table offered a perfect view of the proceedings. I watched Warner take the podium, his confidence palpable as he surveyed his audience. The same confidence, I imagined, that he'd shown all his previous victims before destroying their lives. "Distinguished guests," he began, his voice carrying the polished warmth of a practiced predator. "Tonight marks not just a new chapter for the Children's Hospital Foundation, but a revolution in philanthropic investment." My phone vibrated, Marcus's signal. Across the room, I saw Tom Reynolds slip quietly through the service entrance, followed by 4 individuals in dark suits. The federal agents were right on schedule. Warner's speech continued, building toward his grand revelation. I felt Catherine's hand slip into mine beneath the table, a gesture of shared anticipation that made my stomach turn. She had no idea she was squeezing the fingers that had just signed her financial death warrant. "And so, it gives me great pleasure to announce." Warner's voice faltered as the ballroom doors opened. The agents moved with quiet efficiency, their badges catching the crystalline light. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, like watching a car crash through safety glass. The federal agent's announcement cut through the elegant atmosphere like a blade. "Richard Warner, you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy." The chaos that erupted was perfectly choreographed, though not by Warner's design. As he was led from the podium, his face a mask of shocked confusion, Helen Parker made a dash for the exit, only to find 2 more agents waiting. Catherine's hand turned to ice in mine as she finally understood. Her carefully constructed house of cards wasn't just falling, it was being systematically demolished. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the commotion. "This isn't possible." I turned to face her, allowing the mask of 25 years to finally slip. "You taught me well, Catherine. About burning everything down to build something better." The comprehension that dawned in her eyes was almost beautiful in its horror. She saw it all now, how I had played the fool, encouraged their overconfidence, used Emma's apparent loyalty as a smoke screen while we gathered evidence. Every careful step of their 3-year con had been documented, archived, and handed to the authorities in a neat digital package. But it was Emma's next words that delivered the fatal blow. Standing beside me, our daughter addressed her mother with eyes that held decades of accumulated pain. "The Foundation's board met this morning, Mom. Emergency session. Dad's been appointed interim chairman." Catherine's composure, that perfect, practiced facade, cracked like fine china. "Emma. But you were supposed to be your insurance." Emma's laugh held no mirth. "That's the thing about daughters, Mom. We learn from our mother's examples. All of them." As the federal agents approached our table, warrant in hand, I felt no triumph. Only a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, hollow sense of completion. The game was over, but the victory tasted like ashes and old dreams. Later that night, after the statements had been given and the dust had begun to settle, I stood at my office window watching snow begin to fall over Chicago. The city looked cleansed, its harsh edges softened by winter's quiet descent. Emma sat in one of my leather chairs, both of us wrapped in contemplative silence. "Was it worth it?" she finally asked, her voice small in the darkness. I thought of Catherine's face as they led her away, of Warner's shattered confidence, of Helen's desperate tears. I thought of trust, and love, and how the death of both could birth something harder but perhaps more honest in their wake. "Ask me in 10 years, I replied, watching my reflection fade into the falling snow. "When we know if what we've built from these ashes is actually better." The snow continued to fall, each flake a miniature funeral for the life we'd once known, each silent descent a promise of something new waiting to emerge from winter's long night. But as I stood there with my daughter, watching darkness claim the city we'd both lost and found again, I realized that some prices are worth paying, not for revenge, but for the truth that revenge sometimes illuminates along its bitter path. Spring arrived in Chicago like an uncertain apology, tentative green buds piercing the remnants of winter's grip. 6 months had passed since the gala, each day a careful exercise in rebuilding what remained of my world. The morning newspaper lay unopened on my desk, Catherine's sentencing hearing making headlines below the fold. I traced the letters of her name with a finger that no longer wore a wedding ring, marveling at how familiar shapes could become foreign objects when viewed through the lens of time. The trial had been mercifully swift. Warner's previous victims came forward in waves, their testimonies painting a devastating portrait of calculated destruction. Helen Parker had turned state's evidence, her practiced sophistication crumbling under the weight of federal prosecution. But it was Catherine's testimony that haunted my dreams, her cool recitation of our marriage's slow death, each remembered moment rewritten as a step in an elaborate con. "You never saw it coming," she'd said on the stand, her voice carrying that same note of subtle condescension I'd once mistaken for affectionate teasing. "Because you saw what you needed to see, the perfect wife, the perfect life. Your blindness made it easy." She wasn't entirely wrong. I had been blind, but not in the way she imagined. My blindness had been an act of love, a willing suspension of doubt that spoke more to my capacity for trust than my capacity for foolishness. The revelation had come slowly, in the quiet hours after the dust settled. My ability to love deeply wasn't a weakness to be excised, but a strength to be redirected. Emma took to visiting on Sunday afternoons, our shared trauma forging a new kind of relationship from the ashes of the old. We'd sit in my study, the space that had once housed my ignorance now transformed into an archive of healing. "I found Mom's old journals," she said one such afternoon, spring rain painting fractals against the windows. "From before, everything. She loved you once, Dad. Really loved you." I studied my daughter's face, seeing echoes of Catherine's beauty tempered by something entirely her own, a hard-won wisdom that had aged her beyond her years. "Love isn't always enough," I replied. "Sometimes it's just the costume we wear while waiting to become who we really are." The foundation had flourished under new leadership, its mission purified by the fire of scandal. I'd stepped down as interim chairman, choosing instead to focus on what I'd learned about the geometry of healing, how broken pieces could be reassembled into something new, something stronger at the fracture points. Tom Reynolds found me in my office late one evening, the city lights below us dancing like distant stars. "The last of Warner's accounts has been traced," he said, placing a file on my desk. "Every penny accounted for, every victim compensated. It's over, David." But was it? The neat resolution of financial ledgers didn't address the deeper arithmetic of betrayal, the invisible calculations of trust and loss that still colored every new interaction, every potential connection. I'd started seeing a therapist, not to heal what was broken but to understand the new architecture of my emotional landscape. Dr. Sarah Chen had a way of cutting through my carefully constructed defenses with surgical precision. "You orchestrated a masterful revenge," she'd observed in our last session. "But revenge wasn't what you were really seeking, was it?" The question had stayed with me, threading through my thoughts like smoke. What I'd wanted wasn't revenge at all, it was understanding. The truth, in all its brutal clarity, had been the real prize. Understanding that love and betrayal could coexist in the same heart, that trust wasn't a weakness but a choice we make with open eyes, that healing doesn't mean forgetting but building something new from the remembered pain. I found myself standing in Emma's old room one night, moonlight painting silver shadows across her childhood treasures. The teddy bear still sat in its place of honor, its glass eyes reflecting back 2 decades of family photographs. I picked up one frame, Catherine, Emma, and me at the lake house, all sun-kissed smiles and genuine joy. "That was real," Emma said from the doorway, startling me. She'd taken to using her old key, another small step in our careful reconstruction. "Those moments were real, Dad. Even if what came after wasn't." I set the photo down gently, turning to face my daughter, this wonderful, resilient woman who had emerged from the crucible of our family's destruction. "Everything is real, Emma. Even the lies tell a kind of truth, if we're brave enough to look for it. She crossed the room and took my hand, her grip strong and sure. So what's our truth now? The question hung between us like a bridge spanning past and future. I thought of Catherine in her prison cell, of Warner facing decades behind bars, of Helen Parker's tearful confessions. I thought of trust, and love, and the curious algebra of forgiveness. Our truth, I said finally, is that we're still here. Still standing. Still capable of building something beautiful from broken pieces. Emma's smile held a shadow of her mother's, but it was entirely her own, harder, wiser, but no less genuine. Is that enough? I pulled her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. It's a start. Outside, spring continued its patient transformation of the city. New leaves unfurled like tiny flags of surrender to change, while beneath the thawing earth, roots pushed deeper, stronger for having survived winter's long night. Life, I had learned, moved in cycles of destruction and renewal, each ending containing the seeds of a new beginning. Catherine's words from that night in the parking garage echoed in my mind, sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. She'd been right about that, though not in the way she'd intended. From the ashes of our shared life, something new had emerged, not perfect, not unmarked by fire, but authentic in its scars and honest in its hopes. And perhaps that was the final truth, the lesson written in the language of betrayal and redemption, that healing isn't about erasing the past but about learning to carry it differently. About understanding that every ending is also a beginning, every betrayal an opportunity for renewal, every broken heart a chance to rebuild with stronger walls and wider windows. As Emma and I stood there in the gentle darkness of her childhood room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that no longer existed, I felt something shift inside me, not the sharp-edged clarity of revenge, but the softer, more enduring light of acceptance. The future stretched before us, unknown but unafraid, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to step into it with open eyes and a heart that had learned to trust its own truth. After all, some things have to break completely before they can be remade into something true. And truth, I had finally learned, was worth any price.